It's Thursday, August 21st, 2025. Two of the White House's top messengers in the same place at the same time and dropping bombs, conquering the Smithsonian, and painting it black on the southern border. Next on the AM Update. Well, the campaign to rein in crime in the nation's capital continues. Here's FBI Director Kash Patel with more stats and figures of just 1 week, the difference that the federalization of D.C. has made.
FBI had 41 arrests last night, including 6 gun seizures and 8 drug seizures. That's 8 drug seizures and 6 guns off our streets. Now, the totality and the brilliance of the Trump administration and the Department of Justice combining forces with DEA, ATF, and the U.S. Park Police and our local law enforcement authorities. In just 1 week alone, we have 550 total arrests of violent criminals, including dozens of firearms and 40 drug seizures, to include narcotics, meth, fentanyl, cocaine, and violent crimes such as rape, homicide, assaults, all here in our nation's capital. Larry, I live here now for most of the time, and when you walk around the streets, you'll notice the difference.
That is obviously well and good from FBI Director Kash Patel. Maybe next he can start working on the long-standing swamp creatures, getting them off the streets as well, if you know what I'm saying. Well, a delegation from the president's cabinet went to Union Station in D.C. yesterday in order to visit some of the National Guardsmen who've been called up to defend Washington, D.C. from violent criminals. Among those in attendance in this delegation, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Vice President J.D. Vance, and White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Yes, Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance, two of the best messengers in the White House in the same place at the same time. I think you know what happens. Here's J.D. Vance going toe-to-toe with a hostile reporter.
Polls show that a majority of D.C. residents don't support the Guard here. So what's your message to the majority of D.C. residents?
I'm highly skeptical that a majority of D.C. residents don't want their city to have better public safety and more reasonable safety standards within Washington, D.C. I don't know what poll you're talking about. Maybe the same polls that said Kamala Harris will be the popular vote by 10 points.
There is how you do it, ladies and gentlemen. Never, ever, ever accept the premise of your opponent's arguments. And the premise there was that, D.C. residents don't want the National Guard to be called up. And, of course, J.D. Vance just turned that around. Of course, they want their cities to be safe. You could hear in the background there protesters. Well, that was the topic of conversation for Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, who attended this same little get-together with the National Guardsmen at Union Station.
For too long, 99% of this city has been terrorized by 1% of this city. And the voices that you hear out there, those crazy communists, they have no roots. They have no connection to the city. They have no families they're raising in this city. They have no one that they're sending to school in this city. They have no jobs in this city. They have no connections to this community at all. But they're the ones who've been advocating for the 1%, the criminals, the killers, the rapists, the drug dealers. And I'm glad they're here today. Because me, Pete, and the Vice President are all going to leave here, and inspired by them, we're going to add thousands more resources to this city to get the criminals and the gang members out of here. We're going to dismantle those networks, and we're going to prove that a city can serve for the law-abiding citizens who live there. We are not going to let the communists destroy a great American city, let alone the nation's capital. And let's just also address another thing. All these demonstrators that you've seen out here in recent days, all of these elderly white hippies, they're not part of the city and never have been. And by the way, most of the citizens who live in Washington, D.C. are black. This is not a city that has had any safety for its black citizens for generations. And President Trump is the one who is fixing that with the support of the Metropolitan Police Department, the support of the National Guard, and our federal law enforcement officers. So we're going to ignore these stupid white hippies that all need to go home and take a nap because they're all over 90 years old.
Good job, Stephen Miller. I love that. Oh, and another thing. Oh, and another thing. Oh, and another thing. That was a tour de force. That is Stephen Miller Part 1. Part 2 happened on Fox News, where I think this first sentence that you hear from the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, we need to normalize using this more and more.
The Democrat Party
is an extremist organization.
Yes, let's normalize saying that the Democrat Party is an extremist organization.
It's not a political party in any normal sense of the word. A political party represents Americans. It represents law-abiding citizens. All you see all day long are crazy Democrats screeching on TV on behalf of foreign terrorists, hardened criminals, and violent illegal aliens. A political party exclusively dedicated to protecting terrorists, criminals, gangbangers, and murderers. That's what they become.
There is Stephen Miller, part 2. So 2 of the White House's best messengers, both in the news yesterday, some places at the same time in the same place. I'm going to give the nod. I'm going to give the nod to Stephen Miller just because of the volume of how many times he just dropped bombs yesterday. But good on both J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller. Some people in the upper echelons of our nation's government who absolutely know how to message issues to a T, and we should be thankful for them. Well, a big topic of conversation yesterday was President Trump's recent Truth Social post where he said, quote, "The museums throughout Washington, but all over the country, are essentially the last remaining segment of woke. The Smithsonian is out of control, where everything discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was, and how unaccomplished the downtrodden have been. Nothing about success, nothing about brightness, nothing about the future. We're not going to allow that to happen. I've instructed my attorneys to go through the museums and start the exact same process that has been done with colleges and universities where tremendous progress has been made. This country cannot be woke because woke is broke. We have the hottest country in the world, and we want people to talk about it, including in our museums." Of course, this set off the legacy media, but the White House came with receipts, including this one. I'd forgotten about this. This came out 2020, 2021, summertime around that era. This was a so-called fact sheet that was produced in part by the Smithsonian, an infographic to educate people on, quote, "the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized." Including in that fact sheet, that infographic, a hallmark of toxic whiteness is showing up on time to work and the Protestant work ethic. Yes, that is something that is on this infographic produced by the Smithsonian that says that white culture, this is white culture, showing up on time and having a Protestant work ethic. Those are hallmarks of white culture and probably toxic whiteness, whatever the heck that is. Well, when we come back, we'll go back to D.C. A beautiful sound unfolded. We'll unpack that, painting it black on the southern border, and a hodgepodge of news and note from around the country. That's coming up next. That is the sound of what was at the time, who was at the time, a suspected illegal alien being tackled to the ground by forces in Washington, D.C. after he tried to escape custody. That video emerged yesterday morning of the man who was tackled to the ground, started screaming and crying. It was reported he was a suspected illegal alien. Sometime later in the afternoon, we found out that this was indeed an illegal alien from Mexico, who was previously arrested back in 2024 for aggravated sexual assault of a child under 13. Let's listen to that weeping and gnashing of teeth again. It's just a beautiful sound. The sound of justice being served in real time. Well, we go to the southern border once more, another immigration-related issue. Here's Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who says she got a special job from President Trump.
Now, if you look at the structure that's behind me, it's tall, which makes it very, very difficult to climb, almost impossible. It also goes deep into the ground, which would make it very difficult, if not impossible, to dig under. And today, we are also going to be painting it black. That is specifically at the request of the president, who understands that in the hot temperatures down here, when something is painted black, it gets even warmer, and it will make it even harder for people to climb.
Well, points for creativity and thinking outside the box. Was President Trump just, sitting around looking at pictures of his big, beautiful wall while listening to the Rolling Stones and I see a big wall and I want it painted black? Okay, I'm going to stop. Quick international news. Israel's military has taken the first steps of a planned operation to take over Gaza City. It's according to Israeli military spokesman Brigadier General Efi Defrin. Following a clash with Hamas south of Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip on Wednesday, he said, quote, "We will deepen the attack on Hamas in Gaza City, a stronghold of governmental and military terror for the terrorist organization." Defrin said troops had already begun circling the outskirts of Gaza City, and Hamas was now at a battered and bruised guerrilla force. So, when it came out the other day or a couple of weeks ago that Israel was going to complete and finish the job in Gaza, I thought, how is that different from what they've already done? Apparently, they don't actually have an occupying force in Gaza, and they want to finish the job against Hamas. Few quick items of note from around the country. The duality of the corporation. A couple of different stories about big corporations in this country. One is Cracker Barrel. They're following in the footsteps, apparently, of MSNBC, who announced earlier this week they're rebranding to MS Now. Cracker Barrel has rebranded as well. Instead of getting the guy in the chair leaning up against a barrel with the words Cracker Barrel and Old Country Store emblazoned, it's now just this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this hexagonal shape with the same yellow and black writing. Actually, it is black now. It was kind of a reddish orange before. It just says Cracker Barrel. I mean, they've rebranded. It looks like Dollar General. Why they're doing this? Well, I think you all know. They have been on this kind of long, slow drain in recent years of just kind of getting rid of everything that made them unique and interesting. Starting with, I think it was over a decade ago, pulling some Duck Dynasty content from their Old Country Store shelves because, well, they're a bunch of bigots. That was probably the reasoning. So that's the first duality of the corporation. The other one is this. Bed Bath & Beyond's executive chairman Marcus Lemonis announced Wednesday that the company won't open or operate retail stores in California, saying the decision, quote, "isn't about politics, it's about reality." Lemonis said in a statement posted on X, the decision was driven by the fact that the company wouldn't be able to sustain operations in the state due to higher taxes, higher fees, and higher wages, coupled with endless regulations that strangle growth. Quote, "California has created one of the most overregulated, expensive, and risky environments for businesses in America. That makes it harder to employ people, harder to keep doors open, and harder to deliver value to customers." So there is the duality of the corporation there. Bed Bath & Beyond ceasing operations and will not open any new operations in the state of California, with its CEO, or executive chairman, taking a shot at the over-regulated nature of the People's Republic. Told you the other day about the most common names, or at least the most used names for Democrat women. Well, that same pollster has a list of the most Democratic male names. Well, you will never guess what's number one. Surprised me. We'll just go with the top 5. Germain. 90% of people who have the name Germain are Democrats. Number 4 is MD. That's got to be a misprint. MD. Number 4, people with MD as their name are 90.7% Democrat. Number 3, DeAndre. 90.8% of people with the name DeAndre are Democrats. Number 2, Jamal. 91.4% of people with the name Jamal are Democrats. And the number 1 most Democratic male name, Roosevelt. Maybe it's just because it's not a very common name. 91.6% of people with the name Roosevelt are Democrats. And now here's this apologist, Wesley Huff. This caught my eye the other day. Here he is in a video explaining whether or not the Gospels, the biblical Gospels, are anonymous. And he says, in one sense, yes. Listen to this.
Are the Gospels anonymous? What do you think around the authorship of the Gospels?
The accusation of anonymity, take off the title, the Gospel according to, at the top of the page. Do you know who wrote this Gospel? And in one sense, no, you don't. And I think there is some credibility to the idea of formal anonymity in that we don't know who wrote them if we're just going with the text. I would say a few things to that. We have early copies of the Gospel. And whenever we have either the first page or the last page where the title is described, inscribed on any of these copies, we always had the proper ascription with the proper text. And I think the unanimity of that speaks very strongly to the fact that you never find, say, the text of the Gospel of Matthew with someone else's name attributed to it, whether that's Luke or whether that's Thomas, or it's only ever you see the text of the Gospel of Matthew. At the top, it says the Gospel according to Matthew, and that goes for all the others as well, Luke and John and Mark. Whenever we have what we would call the title, the attribution, we only have consistency across the board. The other thing I would say is we have a lot of early biographical material of other ancient people. Of the between 90 and 100 biographical type writings that we have, 150 years on either side of Jesus. So we're talking about 150 years before, 150 years after this 300-year period of ancient antiquity. Only 2 identify themselves formally within the writings.
Interesting.
All of the others are formally anonymous. So only in Historia Augusta and the life of Aelius and Lucian's passing of Peregrinus do we have an actual attribution of who the author is. And Plutarch, who's considered the most important ancient biographer, he wrote 60 biographies, of which 40 survive today. Of all of Plutarch's writings, he never mentions himself once within the text. Not only that, but Caesar and Xenophon, who are both writing formally anonymously, write in the third person.
Yeah, interesting.
Not unlike the Gospel of John.
So it's pretty
and the
normal.
Gospel of Matthew.
So there's apologist Wesley Huff. He has a very understated gift as an apologist, because you heard him there. How do you deal with the charge that the Gospels are anonymous? Basically, the charge is, how do we know that who is claimed to have written the Gospels is actually who actually wrote them? Actually, if I could say actually one more time. That's a very serious charge, especially if you're a Christian, because basically, if the Gospels are not reliable, and of course, authorship and claimed authorship, if you call into question their authorship, they might not be reliable. That would undercut vast portions of your faith. And you heard the way that Wesley Huff responded there, saying, you know what, in a sense, I can see how you'd see that, but here's like 5 pieces of evidence why that doesn't really square. And here's 5 pieces of evidence why it's actually quite astounding and quite historically accurate to believe that the claimed authors of the Gospels actually are the real authors. I thought that was an interesting clip there from apologist Wesley Huff. And finally, our poll of the week, I asked you, on in vitro fertilization, do you believe it is, number 1, in first place, immoral because it cheapens life? 67% of people selected that answer. In second place, I don't know, at 15.3%. I don't know whether or not IVF is moral or immoral. I just don't know. In third place, other, comment below. We'll get to those in a little bit. That's 10.2%. And 7.3% said IVF is moral, but I'd prefer people choose adoption. Let's begin with Sarah, who says, having worked in mammalian genetics and trained in a procedure with mice very similar to IVF, I can tell you that some embryos have nothing wrong with them. They just don't survive the process. There is much death involved. I love my friends and their IVF kids, but I'm sad for their siblings. Yeah, I think something that we need to remember to do every single time we have these sensitive conversations, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Sarah, is remembering that even if a kid comes about via IVF, they're still made in the image of God, and they are wonderful blessings to both their parents and everyone around them. That is absolutely true. That the child's value has nothing to do with how they were brought into the world. Kay Adkins says it's unethical. The prevalence of this procedure is another example of a me generation. I think that's true in a lot of circumstances, Kay Adkins. I think it's a little bit more complicated than painting that over the entire conversation. We may get into that a little bit. Randy says the process could be moral if done correctly. It's not being done morally for the most part. I think this might be getting into, I think IVF is absolutely immoral when it comes to so-called homosexual parents. There's no such thing as homosexual parents, but just two dudes who think that they're married and are purchasing a baby. That's just high-tech human trafficking. When it comes to heterosexual, like actual, God's design for marriage, but they're just not able to conceive and bear children naturally, I do believe it has a better possibility, although I'm not convinced of it totally myself, a better possibility of at least being a gray area morally. So, Randy, I think that might be what you're getting to. Laura says, as this is not the way God designed the start of life, the practice of IVF creates a number of moral concerns. Priva says, my cousin and her husband used IVF, her egg, his sperm, to create their wonderful son. What I don't know is how many, if any, little lives were not chosen. Today, I'm the director of a pregnancy help clinic, and if only more would choose adoption. The fight is fierce. Yeah, so that's the sticking point here, because I know that there are some couples who will only create a set amount of embryos, human lives, and they have every single intention of using every single one of those embryos, and it doesn't work all the time. But that's kind of a way of addressing that so that we're not doing the selective process of, well, that one we're screening for that disease and that disease, kill it, kill it, kill it. I know there are some Christian couples who will have every intention to use every embryo that they create. Sudden Adult Death Season says, never thought I would see Demolition Man come to life. Seriously, yes, you play God, which is wrong, yet if husband and wife can't have kids and want them, this is an option. Liberty Rejects says, this has long been my position. Separating conception from human function is playing God and clearly sinful. Country Squire says, as it is being done now, no. But if you fertilize one egg and implant in the mother, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I can still see that. There's also the problem of trying to play God. I think that would be the reaction to that. But I can see what you're getting at there, as long as you're just doing it one at a time. The problem is, just doing it one at a time is very unlikely of succeeding. Dylan says, it cannot be possible that the reason God may have made a certain couple infertile is so that they could go and petri dish a bunch of kids in a lab. As long as one child goes unadopted, IVF should not be permitted. That's kind of where I'm at, Dylan. That's pretty much where I'm at. And it's hard because it's sensitive. And it's not a bad desire. In fact, it is a healthy desire for married couples, a man and a woman, to want to have children. That's a God-given desire, actually. But when there are kids to be adopted, and if you tried and tried and tried this way and that way, and had different procedures done, or what have you, it's very sensitive. But I think there's more going on there than just the desire for children. Jay Breezy says, it's creating life to destroy it for humans' gratification. That's one way of putting it from a certain perspective. Valeria says, it's moral, no issues at all. That's interesting. Shulva says, some 20 to 30 children are created and discarded for every live birth. How can it be anything other than barbaric? See, that's proponents of IVF, like hardcore proponents, not ones who recognize at the very least the gray area that this is morally from a Christian perspective. That's the part that they don't want to talk about, because those are facts. I've heard different figures. 2030 is maybe on the high end from what I've seen, but it is true that more often than not, you're quote unquote going through embryos or killing babies just to have one success. Gary says, if it was done where you get 2 embryos at a time, not as many as you can approach as the U.S. takes, it's fine into my eyes. It's when you have to get upwards of 8 viable embryos and only use 2. What happens to the rest? That's what I see as immoral. Just went to a cattle embryo school. Mind Your Business says, IVF and surrogacy is the commoditization of the womb. They will bring us to the Handmaid's Tale way before anything Trump does. That's the irony, isn't it? And James says, IVF separates procreation from God's design for marriage. Children are a gift, not a lab project. Life begins at conception, so freezing or discarding embryos is the shedding of an innocent blood. Adoption reflects the gospel. A lot of thoughtful and interesting answers. I think, at least in this audience, and that's not a surprise to me, I think you're all pretty smart. I think we're ready for the IVF conversation, maybe more than what I thought. Maybe I'm jumping the gun just a little bit by saying that the broader church or the broader Christian community in this country is not ready for this conversation. Maybe that's still true. It's probably more likely that this audience is just thought about this stuff a little bit harder than the average bear. Well, tomorrow is another edition of Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can tell me any news story you think needs covered on the AM Update. Ask me any question you want. Make your submissions over at Real AM Update on X. Look for the pinned post. That's going to do it for a Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.